get into it, all of it, with two NewsNation contributors here, Lauren Wright, scholar at Princeton, Chris Hahn, Democratic strategist. All right, 1 month in, I suppose, is where we are in this Trump administration. Lauren, what would you say? So we'll have the president. We have him almost every day. That's the thing. He's so active, right? Every day we have something live from him in the 3 hours we're on, and we'll have him here in a minute. What would you say about the first month if somebody asked you, they were hibernating, and they said, hey, what was it like?
Well, whether you like him or not, and whether you like his promises on the campaign trail or not, he is implementing those. And I'm not enough of an optimist to say all this government efficiency and everything he's doing with regard to immigration won't result in at least some slip-ups along the way. He's really taken a sledgehammer to a lot of these government agencies. Democrats thought it should be a scalpel. Too bad. They didn't use the scalpel when they were in power. That's sort of how I feel about it. But I do still think it's too early to tell. The executive branch has 4 million employees if we count the military. And there's lots of reasons why the bureaucracy is so large and so complicated.
All right, Chris, we got the 2-minute warning for the president to speak about a minute ago, which means he'll come out anytime in the next 1 minute to 25 minutes, sometimes 2 minutes, not exact, with this administration. What would you say, or how would you respond to that? Because, yeah, he has been active, and I think you and I have talked about this when you've been on. His supporters probably like what they've seen. What would you say about it, though?
Well, first thing I'd say is that this month has been the longest decade I've ever been involved with. It's been pretty freaking crazy.
It has.
But, yeah, look, I think his supporters so far are really happy about what he's doing. The question is when it hits them, how will they feel, right? I mean, the sledgehammer approach, you know, Elon used it with Twitter. Maybe it works in the private sector because you can bring people back or find new people. But when people's benefits start getting cut off, they tend to get upset about it. When projects that are supposed to be built that people need don't happen, they get mad about it. When a storm hits and there's no FEMA to respond, people are going to get upset about it. So I think that, you know, look, I could see why his supporters are happy about what's going on. But I don't think that they've really felt the impact of all that he's doing yet. And once they do, it'll be problematic. But I will also say Republicans in Congress are starting to get very uneasy with his foreign policy, which seems to be tilting towards the Kremlin in a way that they don't like.
If we have for a minute here before he comes out, what would you say about that, Lauren? Because, you know, the president says a lot of things, to your point earlier. He does do a lot of things, executive orders and executive actions. But, you know, when they write the history of this time, I wonder if these comments on Ukraine, you know, throwing an ally under the bus like he did, taking the side of Russia like he did, blaming Ukraine instead of Russia for starting the war like he did, if that's what's going to be remembered from this, you know, time. And I don't know if it hurts him domestically in terms of his politics, but what do you think of what we've seen here over the last few days?
Well, the reason you're not hearing from congressional Republicans is they are completely out of step with how the public feels about this. Public is fairly apathetic in recent polling about the Ukraine war. Republicans have staunchly taken the opinion for decades, for the most part, that Russia shouldn't be allowed to just invade countries and take over land. And so they're between a rock and a hard place there.
Politically, you mean, yeah, they don't want to, well, yeah, they've gone silent, most of them, all of a sudden. Tough to track them down on Capitol Hill. All of a sudden, oh, I got to catch the elevator when they're asked about it. But Chris?
Yeah. Look, they're afraid of Trump, right? But look, 80% of Americans have a distrust for Putin. But unfortunately, one of the 20% that doesn't distrust Putin is the president of the United States. And I think that that's going to be a clash that Republicans in the Senate particularly are going to have to deal with. And they're going to have to deal with it sooner rather than later. Because the path that it appears this man is taking us down is telling our allies in Europe that when trouble comes, they cannot rely on the United States of America. And that will upend you know, a peace, frankly, that has lasted since World War II in Europe, for the most part. Look, Russia ruined that peace when they invaded Ukraine. But I think that the United States of America and our NATO allies need to be there for each other, and Donald Trump doesn't seem to be willing to accept that anymore.
You think, and Lauren, you brought this up, that the American public, to use your words, is apathetic about this, and it's not something that's high on their priority list, and I think you're probably right about that. There's polling that, you know, that backs that up, that there's other things that they think are more important. That said, I mean, even people who support the president, I think, you know, fair-minded people would look at this, you know, as a judgment issue and just say, how could you say, other than the fact that maybe you're personally angry about your first impeachment or something like that, how could you actually say or blame or sound like you're blaming Ukraine for starting a war when they were the ones invaded? You don't think that bothers people, even people who like them?
When they're asked. And so what
Right.
Chris and I are talking about are two different ways to measure this. Chris is saying most Americans distrust Putin. Absolutely true. When we ask them about Russia, they have some issues. It's very low on their priority list, which is what you just mentioned. And so for a lot of Americans, they're more in step with Trump's opinion, no matter what you think about it. And look, I'm someone who thinks 70% of the president's time should be spent on foreign policy, which is, on average what it is. But for Americans,
where do you see
this
who's
is
with
not
Trump?
affecting
All
their
the phones
day-to-day
are going
life.
up
Yep.
here.
Yep.
There's a black